The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. The Investment Fix podcast. Tune in today.
The Fold is brought to you by Bauer Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Nau mai hoki mai ki a The Fold, e mihi ne ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. My guest this week is James Frankham, who is publisher of New Zealand Geographic magazine, and I think one of the most sort of principled and kind of original intellects in New Zealand journalism and publishing. New Zealand Geographic has been around over 30 years. It is very much a separate and independent entity from National Geographic, which it is sometimes confused. It has a very kind of broad and quite serious scope, I suppose. It covers the New Zealand realm, which stretches from the Antarctic up to the Pacific, and looks at the kind of sort of socio-political relationship with the environment and the sort of stories which fall out of that. It's a print publication. It's a digital publication. It is accessible by nearly 800,000 New Zealand school pupils. It's quite activist in its own way. James describes a court case to which New Zealand Geographic was party, where it took the government to court and won. It does really serious, beautifully edited and crafted, long-form journalism. It is by far the best repository of photojournalism in the country. As a result of all that, it wins every award going. It's kind of the Magazine of the Year award at both the MPA Awards and the NPA Awards, the Voyagers, is basically a procession. It tends to always be, in recent years, New Zealand Geographic, and that's kind of hard to argue when you engage with it. It's just a really, really beautifully... It's made with a level of care and love that it's pretty world-class, to be honest. It's currently edited by Catherine Wolfe, who was the Spin-offs books editor. We miss her terribly, but we're also just so proud to see her go on to work on that publication. That's one of the tiny handful of truly great jobs in journalism, and we're very happy to see her do it. But yeah, James has been a friend of the publication for a very long time. We worked alongside one another, literally shared an office in Britomart when we were starting out. Leonie Hayden was then editor of Mana magazine, which was a sort of sibling publication of NZ Geo, and eventually came off to start the spin-off Aotearoa. So there are multiple connections between our organisations. But James has just been someone I've admired hugely over the years for just how principled he is and the extreme levels of care and dedication that are manifest in his product, and also a lot of the kind of innovations around, everything from the revenue side to kind of conceptions of what a magazine can and should be that are present in New Zealand Geographic. So I've wanted to have him on The Fold for a very long time. I'm really thrilled to have him on now, and it is quite, poignant timing in that he just put out an issue that managed to scramble in a sort of a photo essay and a piece of journalism about the impact of Cyclone Gabriel, and that as a story is just right dead centre of the kind of thing which New Zealand Geographic does better than anyone. So this is James Frankham on The Fold. Tēnā koe, James, and welcome to The Fold.
G'day, thanks.
I wanted to start just with the issue that most recently went to press, because I haven't actually seen the physical copy hasn't turned up in my mailbox just yet, but I did see that you managed to get Brett Phibbs out on location with some pretty stunning and very freaky images from the aftermath of Cyclone Gabrielle. Do you want to just tell me about the issue and particularly about how you sort of scrambled to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great joys and great difficulties of publishing a bi-monthly magazine is that you're always a long way behind the news cycle and sometimes a long way sort of ahead of it in terms of what you think you should be reporting on. And that was definitely the case as we were going to press. Basically, the first rain event in Auckland went through on January 27th or whatever, and Brett was out stringing for other organisations. He's a terrific photojournalist, and we've worked with him a lot on a number of different projects, and we asked him to set aside some images for Geographic, as he was also shooting for the Herald and others. So we managed to pick up that okay, and then all hell broke loose in Hawke's Bay as well. And so we ended up kind of scrambling right on press deadline to put together some kind of coherent response. Fortunately or unfortunately, Catherine Wolfe, who is editing Geographic at the moment, is from Hawke's Bay herself, and so she watched her own sort of family farm go underwater and see pictures of her neighbours' properties and places that she loved sort of turn up the toes or get covered in silt. And so she had a sort of a background there and managed to call John Copeland as well, who's a photojournalist down that way, and I think he shoots for Stuff. And so he also set aside some frames for us, and we were communicating with him 3 or 4 times a day across that period, and then put something into the latest issue that, you know, we needed to think in terms of the text about what the conversation would be in 2 weeks' time. By the time it actually came out on the newsstand, because it doesn't come out till next Monday. So we're always trying to work ahead of where we want to be, or where we are, I guess. And so it's just kind of a classic example. Other times we get a solid 6 weeks to pull something together. Yeah. So, but we don't pretend to be a daily news title. You know, we want to be a slower, more coherent response to the happenings of the world. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about that scope, because I think for your subscribers and for anyone who's had any kind of sustained contact with the publication, it's quite manifest what it's about. But I think, you know, in the same way that people can kind of confuse it with National Geographic, which I'm sure is something you love to talk about.
Yeah, Big Yellow, yeah.
There's also probably some aspect of the breadth of its scope, breadth and depth of its scope that maybe people don't quite understand. And I think, you know, an event like Gabrielle and like a number of increasingly frequently happening events we've had over the past few years really do speak to the core purpose of the magazine. So just give me a sense of what it's about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when many people think about New Zealand Geographic, they immediately liken it to National Geographic, and they think it's a magazine about sea lions and tree ferns, and that's about it, you know. But more than half of our coverage is social or sort of wider enviro-social, I suppose, in terms of the area of interest, and acknowledging this massive dependency between environment and society. If the environment is broken, society is broken by default, you know, so we can't have one thing working and not the other. So there's no sort of real trade-off. That idea is a bit of a fallacy in terms of trying to exchange dollars for environmental sort of cohesion, I suppose. In terms of our remit, we're most interested in the New Zealand realm, which is obviously mainland New Zealand, but also the offshore islands, also the Antarctic dependency, the subantarctic islands, and then all the way up to our dependencies and states and free association in the Pacific, which is Niue and Tokelau and the Cook Islands. That's the geographic scope. And then thereafter, actually, everything else is just about treatment. And we hope and we want to have a distinctive treatment on a story. So generally it's a long-form feature is what we're sort of known for, and very visually led. Most of the time we have photographers on the ground for just as long as we have a journalist, and we're still commissioning a lot of original photojournalism in New Zealand. And then it's a creative treatment of reality, I suppose. So that sort of long form, almost American style school of journalism, more so than a sort of a UK style.
Do you? I mean, the irony is you just described the most enormous patch and formidable scope, and yet, we used to be neighbours in down at Britomart, and I've seen the scale of the team that produces it, and there's something that doesn't quite make sense, but it's probably why you, as before we came on, we're talking about being somewhat tired. But yeah, just tell me about how you take it, what is a very small full-time team, and create something of such sort of scope and substance.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that very well, because it seems like a bit of a miracle every time it goes to press or every time it goes live on the website. We have about 2.5 employees. One of them is the subscription manager, one of them is me, and and another one is the editor. Above and beyond that, there's a lot of really hardworking and seriously committed contributors, being feature writers and photojournalists. And they do the grunt work. Really, we're just sort of conductors of an orchestra, I suppose, standing at the front, trying to make things go left or right, and pulling together and stirring the pot, I suppose, to mix metaphors, and just trying to make sure things adhere to the kind of treatment that we know and love. Something that is creative and something that is personal, and something that's Kiwi in its response. And I think having a small team is sort of part of that. I mean, basically we hustle essentially, and we pull together a lot from a little, and it's not, it's not all hard work. It's really, really enjoyable. It's good fun, and press days, which can be the biggest, hardest days of any 2-month cycle, are also sometimes the most fun, because you're really seeing the thing take shape in front of your eyes, and it still excites me a lot, and still pulling these features together and making these editorial decisions with the editor is really good fun.
In terms of that, sort of building something that has the texture and feel of the kind of great American journalism with such a small team, without having staff writers, in the same way that like the Atlantic or any of the kind of great American publications would have. How would you sort of rate the sort of talent availability and kind of creation on that side because you've been involved with the magazine for quite some time, and we've seen people come and go, and what's available to you evolve over time?
Look, I think it's the same as everything else in New Zealand. I think the best performing New Zealanders are up there with the best in the world for anything, pretty much, from plumbing to songwriting to feature writing and photojournalism. Richie, who does a lot of Richie Robinson, who does a lot of photography for us, he was just over winning a category award for the Natural History Photographer of the Year, international award. Kate Evans does a lot of writing for us, and also writes for BBC and The Guardian and Hogan and others. It's exceptionally talented people and world class. The real trick is how you pay them at sort of world class rates, and that's considerably harder. We do our best there, and I imagine it's something that the spin-off is up against as well. How do you make it work financially? How do you put together a team that is of this caliber and make sure they get rewarded on the same level as they can get rewarded when they're working for the Atlantic or something?
Yeah, and I think also, just given that the extent, and we'll probably talk about this shortly, the way that the digital economy for journalism has evolved, and people's expectations for quality and willingness to pay in an online environment versus a print environment. Because you've spent actually, the digital product has as much of a kind of has the same kind of qualities as the print product, but in our correspondence, you expressed some skepticism about how the way that digital functions from a financial perspective versus the print publication. Do you want to talk about your sort of struggles?
Yeah,
there?
I feel like it changes every 15 minutes though. It's just so turbulent out there in the digital sphere. I mean, it's pretty hard in print as well, but it's particularly turbulent in digital. And the way that you can make $1 off it one week is different from the next week, and you get tooled up and organised following a particular path, and then the algorithm changes and you're stumped. And you know that as well as I do. And so you try and control as many of your channels as you possibly can, or try and have as great a level of ownership of that as you can. But even then, the tech giants sometimes, somehow win, and so yeah, it's a struggle. We put all the entire archive of Geographic up online, and that's available as a sort of institutional subscription for libraries and schools, and it's very popular. We have 779,000 school students all subscribed to the digital archive, which we hope has a kind of a timeless quality to it. We put a lot of effort into the treatment of the digital stories to make sure they feel as luxurious and lush and easy to read, and sort of high value in terms of those production values as the print product. But then again, you do a trial subscription for $1, and and then it's $8.50 every 2 months, and you kind of cross your fingers and hope that people come back for a second month, and it costs them $50 a year, but still people are rubbing their chins and wondering, do they put in their $8.50 this 2 month cycle or not? And so how you make that paywall work for you? I mean, we're pretty committed to the reader revenue model. We committed to that in 2016 when we basically put up the renewed version of the site and built our paywall. And we're committed to the subscription model as well, which has been quite good for magazines overall. I mean, typically, I guess about 10 years ago, magazines were one of the very few things in the world that you could subscribe to, and you paid money in advance for a whole year's worth of media product from a media entity, which seems daft for any basic consumer sort of relationship. But then Netflix came along and all of the other streaming services, and people got very used to subscribing to things. So that has got a lot easier. So some of those things have become easier, some of them have become harder. Is reader revenue going to be the only sort of way to do it in the future? Probably not. But how else do you do it? Ads have never really worked for us. Scale has never really worked for us, or particularly for me. And the tech giants, you realise after a while, give you all this stuff, but are not really your friends. And it's hard out there, yeah. And we haven't cracked it. I'll be the first to admit it.
I mean, I think at least from a product perspective, I have to disagree with you. But I think also, as you suggest, a lot of the environments you operate in, you just don't have a huge amount of influence over. One of the most graphic illustrations of that was which we covered and were impacted by, but certainly not nearly so. We weren't nearly so close to it as you were, which was the collapse of Bauer, the biggest publisher of consumer magazines in New Zealand in 2020. Do you want to just talk about that event and how that impacted the magazine industry more broadly? Because you've got quite a big relationship with magazine publishing, probably outsized versus the kind of staff of the magazine.
Yeah, it was the Zoom of doom where Brendan sat on the other side in Sydney and fired about, 200 staff in Auckland in one Zoom call. I wasn't there, of course, unfortunately, and nobody had really seen it coming. It took everyone by surprise, and I think, to be fair, it even took Brendan by surprise over in Sydney. They just pulled the pin somewhere in Germany. It was a shockwave for magazine publishing in New Zealand, that's for sure. They had made a short and feeble attempt to influence government around that. It came at the same time as magazines were banned in supermarkets, and yet you were still allowed to buy fish bait. It was one of these strange things that happened where the government got just about everything right, but a whole lot of tiny things wrong in terms of the immediate COVID response. But what happened at the end of the day is that the magazine market fragmented enormously. Some of those magazines went on to get picked up by other publishers. Some of them died overnight. There were a lot of freelancers that really had to hold their breath for a very, very long time. And naturally, we supported them where we could, but we are still just one bi-monthly magazine. And one of the sort of unintended consequences of that essentially was that a lot of those writers that had been struggling for some time, and photojournalists, I might say, ended up going to commercial jobs or working for PR or jumping the fence one which way or the other, and left the magazine and media industry altogether. And it was very obvious right at that moment that the media industry needs all of the media players. We're really not in competition with each other. We need everybody around to offer enough employment for a diversity of writers and a whole sort of choir of contributors to be writing and photographing for New Zealand media outlets. And I think that was probably the biggest outcome of the Bauer saga. But it was also another lesson in terms of the local ownership or not of media. And an international organisation could dust their hands and walk away without any feeling whatsoever for the people that were left behind, either the audiences or the contributors or the staff. And I sat on the Magazine Publishers Association at that time, and I still do now. And it was a difficult time, and it was definitely a time where you wanted everybody in the room and contributing and talking and helping, not people just pulling the pin and walking away.
The Fold is brought to you by Bauer Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to Bauer Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
In terms of that sense of being, you live here, you own the publication, and that sense of being a publication that can't go anywhere else, and it's your life, your livelihood, versus basically this was a line on a spreadsheet in Germany which enabled some historically important publications just to kind of vanish, some never to return. How important is that independence and that ability to do some, you've taken the government to court. There's some things which you do while running the magazine, and maybe you could talk about some of them, which are highly unconventional for a publisher, to say the least.
Yeah, some of them are not very lucrative either, Yeah, I mean, like you say, I'm committed to New Zealand. It's a family organisation, a family company, and you do things for reasons that are not always commercial and very often not commercial, And sometimes I also help myself to the plum editorial assignments too. It's one of the great joys of it. I don't do it very often, mind you, but I think being local is important, and I think that readers feel it somehow, because there's a trajectory to the magazine, there's a trajectory to the publishing company, there's, I guess, a method in the madness in terms of what we do next and why we do it, and all of that is born from an editorial New Zealand context and a personal New Zealand context as well. And so we care deeply about what we produce, so it's not just the writers who care about it, it's the organisation itself fundamentally. We partner with other local organisations on a very local basis too, and I've got kids in schools just like everyone else, and I want to see them, seeing the best resources and the most relevant kind of local context present within the resources they look at, and so that's really important for us as suppliers to the Ministry of Education. We're also suppliers to our own kids. It's important for us in terms of living in this environment, and particularly for me, being really connected to the sea and the ocean estate, and caring about that, and that's reflected in the content that we produce as well, because we want to live and exist in a healthy environment and a healthy ocean. We want to take our kids walking in forests that are intact and not just everything being tarnished by utilitarian values, I suppose. And that sounds ideological, and I guess it is. And I don't make any apology for that,
Well, on some level, what you describe also has a, kind of feels like it marries up quite well to like a Te Ao Māori lens, a kind of kaitiakitanga. And you've taken on a Māori editor as part of the PIJF, and certainly there's a conversation about the relationship between people and the whenua and the broader environment that feels very present in the publication. So tell me about how that sort of evolved in recent years.
Yeah, look, I'm really happy that it feels present in the publication. Geographic's been around for 33 years, and I think there's always been a willingness and a desire to get it right in terms of reporting on Te Ao Māori, and certainly reporting from a Te Ao Māori perspective. And right from the earliest days, when it was established in 1989, there were Māori writers that were chosen for Māori stories. But we haven't done it well, and you look back over that time, and there are moments where you're reading the copy and you feel your skin crawl a little bit, and even the editors of the day would probably look back with the same and reflect on it in the same way. And so, we can always do better. And last year we had an opportunity to bring on board Nick Lowe, who's first and foremost, he's an incredibly talented writer and editor from a literary background. His Kaitahu affiliation, and he has been really terrific in terms of help steering the waka. When we made this pitch, it was funded through the Public Interest Journalism Fund, and we made the pitch to New Zealand On Air, and we said that a double-hulled waka is more stable and faster. And Polynesians have known that for some time, but we're just getting to grips with it as Pakeha. And the double-hulled waka for New Zealand Geographic should definitely be both treaty partners as the hulls of that waka, and be more stable and perform better as a result. And I think that's been true, and it's really it's not without its challenges, of course. When you try and turn that corner, when you try and make legitimate efforts to improve the penetration of Te Ao Māori into your organisation, it has to happen at every level. It has to be revolutionary, and it's hard mainly from a plain old supply and demand perspective. There are only so many Māori journalists, and there are only so many Māori editors, and that is an indictment upon the media industry in general, for decades and decades, and it's not going to change overnight, and it will require more than just us or the spin-off or whatever making inroads there and making effort. It requires the whole industry to change and to kind of fill that pipe. We've seen that with Tirito and other cadetship sort of schemes that are bringing more Māori, more Pacific Islanders, more Asian influence into the media sphere to tell those stories and to sort of reflect New Zealand as it is rather than just as what we think it is to be,
I mean, that also, I think what you said there is also speaks to, you've already alluded to it a bit, but this idea of a publication that is unapologetically political in some respects, that not only covers stories. I think, for example, there was a fantastic feature, I think it was Naomi Arnold wrote about the Dome Valley fire, and there is the event, and then there is the kind of atmosphere which created the event, and so do you want to just talk, I guess, about that perspective, about this court case that you for example, maybe use that court case with the Ministry of Fisheries as an example of the publication sort of leaping a fence or two of its own in terms of where it considers a natural boundary to exist?
Yeah, I had an argument about this just the other day with an editor of another media organisation who said that she was very much in the free speech brigade. And I think free speech has got a lot of terrific values, and I will argue for it at every point. But I would make a number of caveats, and those caveats are that free speech hasn't really been helpful for society in terms of how it's treated in an environment where some people have megaphones and others don't, or an environment where, like on social media, where there would just be huge pile-ons, or where you end up with a filter bubble and people are only speaking within their own community, or where there's active people participating in disinformation campaigns. And in those cases, I think free speech becomes harder to defend. So I guess about 2020, we sat down and decided, it was Rebecca White, who was editor at the time, sat down and decided that, actually around when we're reporting on COVID, when we're reporting on climate, when we're reporting on racism or equality or the marine environment or biodiversity, I think that was about it, actually. On those subjects, we're going to take a committed stance. And that's going to be quite different from when we report on, inflation, where we'd be quite happy to quote numerous opinions because the outcomes of those opinions aren't dangerous. If you try to provide equal column inches on something to do with climate, for instance, there are some dangerous opinions that can be forwarded and picked up and amplified, and we will have no part of that. So, yes, we've taken a committed stance there, and that's followed through to scientific research. We have commissioned work. We've done work ourselves. We have an in-house scientist working in the marine field, and as a result of some of that work, we've been following the marine space very, very closely in terms of marine policy and fisheries policy, where New Zealand lags horribly behind the rest of the world. And we're doing that because 93% of New Zealand is salt water. We've got the fourth largest marine estate in all the world. We're a marine superpower, and we're not treating that with the kind of responsibility that it should have. So there was one particularly, a number of fairly awful fisheries decisions, but all of them came back to one common value, and that was that the Minister of Fisheries was not taking the entire ecosystem into account when considering the quota on single species. And the Fisheries Act required him to, in this case David Parker, to take all of the ecosystem into account when making these fisheries decisions. And the example that we chose was the Cray 1 decision, where he decided to take a very small cut on the crayfish quota, despite all scientific evidence to the contrary, suggesting that the ecosystem would suffer, that it would see the collapse of our reefs up in Northland. And we got together with the Environmental Law Initiative and another number of other players, including iwi, up in Northland, and took the case to the High Court and won against the minister, and he had to remake that fisheries decision and take the environment into consideration when making commercial decisions for private fishing companies. And I think that that's sort of the micro, but you can take that to the macro. We see that all over New Zealand at the moment. We see the commons being divvied up for the benefit of private organisations or publicly listed commercial organisations, and all New Zealanders are losing out, or all New Zealanders need to pay the environmental cost of those commercial activities. And that could be said of forestry when you have billions of tonnes of forestry / run down the Esk River and take out bridges and things like it's just happened in Hawke's Bay or in Takamaru Bay. And it happens when the marine environment gets depleted of predators and kina overrun it and destroy the reefs. And it happens the same with climate, when some organisations are allowed, or some polluters are allowed to emit whatever they like without being tested on that, and the rest of New Zealand needs to pay the environmental cost of it, and we're paying the environmental cost of that now. Same with runoff into our rivers, and it just happens over and over and over again, and it's frustrating when nobody sees the writing on the wall here. And we feel like we're reporting on that same stuff again and again and again. And it's pretty much our bread and butter. It's always, for Geographic, the traditional feature is just, here is the environment, and here is how we're utilising it. Here are the policy settings, and here are the consequences. Are you happy with this picture? We never make the judgment call, but it's always, where would you put your policy? Where would you personally have your settings? Do you want $1 now, or do you want your kids to swim at the beach next week? We're quite happy if people choose the economy over the environment, but people need to choose. They need to be active in that decision making. They need to be thoughtful when they're doing it. And that's all we're doing as publishers, is just wanting to hold up this mirror and say, are you happy with this picture?
That's a pretty extraordinary kind of manifesto to end on. And if that sounds profound to you, then you should definitely be seeking out NZ Geographic if you don't already. James, thanks so much for coming up here. And I just couldn't admire more the effort you and your staff and contributors put into that publication.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. It's a pleasure.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at Bauer Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to Bauer Media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.